Howdy, and welcome to Chapter 1. All right, let's see here. The last couple of videos gave you some definitional stuff and a little bit of an introduction. Now, speaking of introduction, that's the name of the first chapter in the book. I thought about it for a long time and consulted various other books to see what they call, what do they call Chapter 1, and well, I went with introduction. Now, let's go to Chapter 2. The quizzes in the class are set up by chapter. Well, actually, the first quiz might be chapters 1 and 2, but chapter 1 is pretty short. So what I'm talking about now will be some factors related to the quiz, but I wrote the quizzes by reading through the book. All right, so everything should be right there in the book for the quizzes. But let me start off here with chapter 2, economics as a. I'll probably just talk here, so let me pull the camera back a little bit rather than I was initially thinking that I'd be writing a lot on the board, but I'm not sure I will for this chapter. All right, so it'll be more like story hour. Hello, is everyone seated? Good. All right, chapter 2, economics as a scientific discipline. All right, first of all, one of the things that I wanted to try to establish early on in the chapter was that science doesn't make something right. Okay? That science is biased, just as anything else is. Having said that, the particular subgroup of people who participate in science pride themselves on trying not to be biased. All right, so it's impossible to be completely unbiased, but it is one of the values that scientists have to try to be unbiased. So as much as one can be, that's what they try to be. However, nevertheless, we end up with problems, and that's what I'm going to get into here. All right, first of all, what it talks about is the fact that when you're in grade school, they talk about science like the way I did a second ago. Like it's this unending process of replacing ignorance with truth. And obviously, what science has done has been incredible. Right? We would not have powered flight and penicillin and so forth had it not been able. But it's not a slow replacement of ignorance with truth. Dr. Quinn told me a story once. He said that in his biology class in college, the professor said 90% of what I'm teaching you is wrong. The only problem is we don't know which 90% of it is yet, right? So later on down the road, then we'll figure out what we were saying that was right and wrong, or at least what we decide is right or wrong at that moment, right? So we go forward, we go backwards, and so forth with science. You need to be careful thinking to yourself that I saw one of my friends posted something on Facebook the other day. It says something about you can't argue with science. I was like, that's pretty much all scientists do is argue with each other. So yeah, you absolutely can. And you're supposed to subject it to argument. You're supposed to subject it to criticism. Right? So that's something we should encourage. Now, let me tell you first of all that in the social sciences, when you write a paper about something, it's very easy for bias to be, sort of steering what you study and so on, just as I said in the previous videos. But did you know that they even talk about it in the natural sciences? That in the natural sciences, when you put an experiment together, there is a tendency to design it to generate the outcome you expected. And part of that is subconscious, but part of it, if you think about it, is very logical. I use an example in the book. I said, what if you were setting up some chemical experiment and you didn't expect it to give off any heat? So you didn't put a thermometer in. Now, probably thermometers are pretty cheap and you would do that regardless, but let's, just for sake of argument here, you didn't put a thermometer in, you might miss an extremely relevant phenomenon because you didn't expect it. All right, so it's not like you're saying that people are setting up experiments intentionally to show what they expect to see. That certainly happens, but even the best-willed scientists who are trying to avoid bias nevertheless will, by experiment design, tend to create the outcome they expect because they don't look for the stuff that they're not expecting, by definition. So if you think they've got a problem, then imagine us. That with economics, we've got the problem of, as I already mentioned, it being affected by politics, of people having vested interest in the outcomes and so on. So it's very difficult. So what I want to talk about now in the context of that is how the economics discipline works, okay? How being a professor works, because the vast majority, well, I'm going to get into that here in a second. Let me double check here and make sure there's not something else I want to talk about. No, I'll come back to these things. But yeah, let me show you the little PowerPoint I put together for this. And likely as not, I mean, I'm doing this some weeks before I end up doing it in class, so who knows what will happen in between. But knowing me, I haven't shared the PowerPoint with you. I am happy to. I just don't think about it. So if somebody wants to see it, let me know and I'll email it to everybody. Maybe I have. Maybe I surprised myself and went ahead and did that. But just in case I didn't. All right, so check this out. I've already tested this, and it works pretty well. What I had done for econometrics was anything I wanted to show on a computer screen, I showed on the big screen TV. But this time what I'm going to do is, and I checked it out a minute ago, and it seemed to work pretty well. I know there are different, actually I'm going to shift it over a little bit. I know there are different fancy ways of accomplishing this, but I've got so much to do that I'm trying to do this the easy way. All right, so and this works. This works, and it's functional. Whoa, that doesn't work. Okay, so here is a PowerPoint on becoming an economist, and the idea here is again that the way the discipline of economics works, the way being a professor works, has a big impact on which theories are accepted, which ones are rejected, what policies are put in place, and so forth. So I want to teach you a little bit about, and it's in chapter 2, teach you a little bit about how the economics discipline works. Now, that's my hand. I'm going to reach over here and hit the enter key. All right. The manner in which the profession trains economists has a decisive influence on there should be the sort of theories and models created and therefore economic policy. So that's what the point I made just a moment ago. And then I put somebody's book in there for some reason. I don't know. The training starts at the undergrad level, which is what you're doing, and it focuses on the textbook approach, all right? This creates a standardization and convenience, which is great, but textbooks tend to aim for the lowest common denominator because they want more sales. Back when we would teach the intro classes, which we, for reasons I'll explain to you at some point if you're interested, we don't anymore. Well, okay, I'll tell you right now. We went from like 70 majors to 370. We don't have enough faculty anymore. So now, for the most part, the intro classes are being taught by adjuncts who, luckily, are quite good. We've had some bad luck in the past, but right now we've got some really good ones. So anyway, when we would choose the textbooks, I mean, they would advertise things like written at a 6th grade level, because they want to sell as many as possible. So that's the drawback. On the plus side, hey, I want to teach labor economics. Well, there's some labor economics textbooks out there. So, that way it's much more convenient. And when you take labor economics at one university, it's not going to be terribly different from another university. That's the standardization. As I mentioned, there was no book for this class, so that's why I done writ one. But again, they're going to be written for the lowest common denominator because they want higher sales. They're going to avoid controversy, and it may take considerable time for new ideas to filter into them. Now, they increase sales by employing these big-name authors and adding lots of extra, this book also comes with 17 exams and, 6,000 multiple-choice questions and all kinds of stuff like that and flashy advertising. Well, again, I don't want to take too much away from that. A lot of it quite well done. But it creates certain trends, like the lowest common denominator, like avoiding controversy and so forth. So, but that's what happens at the undergrad level. Oh, and there is indeed widespread evidence of bias. I don't know if you know this or not, but the economics discipline is heavily white male dominated, more so than even the natural sciences. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit more. Here we go. More so than the natural sciences. And this is a study here I thought was very interesting. They looked at the references in economics textbooks to people, whether or not they reference them as a male or female, economists, and these were from, I can't remember now, I wrote this a couple years ago, but I think it was maybe the top 10 intro textbooks. 92% of them, whenever they referred to an economist in the book, it was a man. 92% of the time when they referred to an economist, it was a man. A made-up ordinary person was a man, 60%, almost 60% of the time, and 40% for a woman. A policymaker was even worse than economist. It was 93% of the time it was a man. Any public figure, you can see over here, 76% to 24%. And a real-world business leader, 94% to 6%. So, now, what they're trying to point out here is that this has an impact, that you begin to think to yourself in the back of your head that an economist is a man, right? And a housewife is a woman's. Well, obviously, John, you said wife, but anyway, that sort of thing. So these textbooks that they come out with are, as I said, there's some advantages, but there's also some disadvantages, and there's also some inherent biases that get built in. And by the way, as I said to you, the econ majors tend to be 3-to-1 male, and it peaked in the 90s and has fallen since. PhDs, 31%, hasn't risen in 20 years. We are so far behind the natural sciences even. Female full professors, really low percentages. And here was asking women in 1997 versus 2010, how happy are you in, I'm going to zoom in a little bit more again, I decided I zoomed out too much. How happy are you in your discipline of, I could just be moving the computer, couldn't I, you moron? How happy are you in your discipline, whether it be economics or social science or geoscience or whatever? And ours was the only one, let's see, social science here, how'd that one do, econ? Job test, the difference between very satisfied and somewhat satisfied. Yeah, we got worse, right? We got worse over those two periods, and that's not good. All right, so we'll get into that, as you can imagine, when we get around to the feminist economic stuff, but there's a lot of argument that the discipline itself tends to be biased towards white males. Right? And again, this ends up being reinforced in the textbooks. So the very point at which we're going to capture an econ major, they're driven off right away. And by the way, we're very keenly aware of that at TCU, that we capture most of our majors in the intro classes. I did not start college as an econ major. Most people who end up in econ did not start as an econ major. So we know we got to get them there, but then these textbooks introduce particular biases. So, but that's what the undergraduate training is like. All right, now let's say you go onto a PhD program, onto a grad school, and I took this quote off of the California State University East Bay Department of Economics webpage. They've since taken it down because I've shared this thing all over the place because I thought it was so damning. All right, this is what they said. Preparing to enter a PhD program in economics requires a lot of time. The courses you need to take are likely to surprise you. If you are contemplating a PhD in economics, chances are that you have taken some economics courses already. Yeah, no kidding. And that you have enjoyed them and performed well in them. It is natural to assume that this is sufficient to obtain admission to a PhD program. That is, if you major in economics with a high GPA, one might naturally assume that this will earn you admission into a solid PhD program. Nothing could be further from the truth. They didn't say, you might need a bit more than that. Or, yeah, it depends on your focus. Nothing could be further from the truth. And what they're going to say is that the high level of mathematics that they require in grad programs is such that being a really good undergrad econ major is not helpful. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that. It is far from a guarantee. What about in biology? If you did really well undergrad in biology, I'm guessing that's a really good indication you do well in a PhD program. Likewise in engineering, likewise in finance, and so forth. We have this weird situation where, because of the heavy shift towards mathematics in graduate school, that we actually get people, it's not unusual for someone to get a PhD in economics having done undergrad in, say, math or engineering or something like that, where their initial interest was never economics, it was the mathematics itself, and then they found an interest in economics later. But at any rate, so what we're trying to say here is, and as it explains in the book, is that what really distinguishes the graduate, let me see what the next slide is. Well, I'll leave it there. What really distinguishes the graduate level education is the heavy shift towards mathematics. Let's see here. Using mathematical time in school. I'll take those. Economics humor. That using mathematical functions to describe everyday phenomena. And absolutely, that's exactly what we did. I thought it was fun because I had been a physics major, but I didn't feel like I learned a lot about the economy per se, just ways of modeling it. Okay, something else very important you learn in graduate school, that not only the heavy shift towards mathematics, but the heavy shift towards journal articles. Some disciplines are really big on their professors writing books. I'm going to talk about why that's important in just a minute. But ours is a discipline that focuses on journal articles. In history, for example, you pretty much have to write a book in order to get tenure, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then you got to have at least another book before you can get full professor. Whereas in economics, books are not, the book that I wrote for this class did very little for me in terms of promotion. Well, I'm already full professor, but raises at the university, and I make about $100 a year or something like that. So I would have been better off spending that time working at McDonald's. So I just wanted to write it. But if you really want to be rewarded in economics, you have to write articles. But wait, there's more. Oh, and I'm sorry, let me tell you this. One of the reasons is that we feel like that articles are much more competitive than books. There's only so much space in a journal. So they're going to have to turn down articles that they don't like. Whereas there's always space, particularly nowadays when books can be electronic, on the bookshelf. Now that doesn't mean that just anyone can get a book published at a decent publisher, but it's relatively easier. So we view the articles as more of a trophy, if you will, than we do books. But wait, there's more. There's a definite hierarchy of which journals are seen as better than others. And let me go into that a bit more in just a moment. Okay. Actually, let me finish that. Just one more thought on that. Where's the backspace key? No, I'll come back to that. But remember that. Remember that the journal ranking is really important. Okay. Well, now let's talk about TCU for a minute. We've got 4 different types of professors at TCU. We have instructors who teach a 4-4 load, which means they teach 4 classes in the fall and 4 classes in the spring. They are not required to do any research, and they are contract to contract. There's 3 levels of instructor. At the lowest one, I believe the rule is that we have to renew you every year or you don't have a job. And then at the next level, it's every 3 years, that sort of thing. Then there's assistant professor. Now, these next 3 here, where's my finger? There it is. Come back this way, John. All right. Assistant professor, associate, and full. These are all kind of related here. This is a different job track, all right? So you could come into the Econ department at TCU as an instructor, or you could come in as an assistant professor. Assistant professor has a 3-2 teaching load, which means 3, it could be fall or spring, but 3 one semester and 2 the next, with a research expectation. And assistant professors are on probationary employment for about 6 years, when they will be evaluated for tenure and promotion. So you can only be an assistant professor, and I think it's in year 6, but I can't remember if it's after 6 years or in the 6th year, but whatever. You can only be there for that amount of time. Then you have to have done enough to get promoted to associate professor. If you haven't, then you're fired. Those who fail are given a 1-year terminal contract. Again, this is all going to feed into factors that are relevant to how schools of thought work. All right, so, and when you are promoted to associate professor, you are almost always given tenure, which means that unless they find out that you slashed the chancellor's tires, we can't fire you. Now, the idea of tenure is to allow people to teach schools of thought that are unpopular without being punished. Now, the negative side, of course, is that if we tenure somebody who is a lazy son of a gun, we're stuck with them pretty much forever. That is why the assistant professor part of the process is so important to both the professor in question, and the university. Because the university doesn't want to do that wrong. The university don't want to be stuck with somebody. And I have seen people get turned down for tenure, and I totally agreed that if this person is going to be this lazy coming up for associate professor, then we're going to be stuck with a crappy person that you're going to end up taking classes from forever. All right, well, not forever because someday they'll die, but until they die, right? Now, associate professor, you can stay there forever. And I'm going to talk about the promotion process from here to here in just a moment. Yeah, I am. Yeah, that's next. You can stay at associate forever. Remember I just said you can't stay at assistant forever. You have to get promoted or you're fired. Associate you can stay at forever. But if you want to, you can go up for full professor, which is pretty much still the same job as associate. You just have a higher rank, which means that you got a rank adjustment in your salary, so you got a nice raise. And promotion to this rank is almost entirely dependent on research, a full professor. Okay, now let's talk about that really important decision from here to here. You're going to submit a folder that consists of 3 elements. One is going to say, this is how well I did at teaching. And it's very important, it's hard to measure. And it's also because what we usually end up doing is we end up going in and observing someone's classroom for the day. Well, what does that really tell you about how well somebody's teaching? It's really hard to measure. What we do in our department is we aim to try to hire only people who enjoy teaching. This is something they want to do. I'll never forget, Dr. Mike Butler and I were interviewing job candidates years ago, and this guy comes in, sits down, and says, well, I don't like teaching intro classes. I was like, oh my God, that's what's a major part of our job. So Dr. Butler and I had to pretend to talk about stuff for another 30 minutes, even though we thought, we're never hiring this guy. He doesn't even want to teach the intro class. And surely he's not really that crazy about teaching the upper level classes. So that's how we've tried to get around that, but it's very hard to measure. And by the way, it's also a ton of work when you've just started. And I had forgotten how much work it can be until I had to do these classes, switching them over to online instead of just in the classroom. My God, it's a ton of work. And so think about that. These assistant professors are at the part of their career where teaching is the most demanding. All right, and you're really learning a lot about your own teaching style and stuff like that. However, something that you can't do is fail at teaching a class. All right, in the sense that, well, I'm looking here at your CV, curriculum vitae, and it shows here that you were assigned to teach 3 classes in the fall, but you only taught 1 of them. That's not really going to happen. You're going to teach all 3 classes. Right? And why that's important is when we get down here to research, we're going to say it's possible for you to spend 6 years desperately trying to get something published and not getting anything published. However, if you desperately try to teach, you're going to teach, all right? So you're going to get classes. And as I said, the feedback is quick, and the hard work is going to pay off. Whereas hard work under research may not pay off. It is extremely important. It is easy to measure, unlike teaching, because all we got to do is count up the articles. It's competitive. University doesn't have to administer the process, but as it says, you can work very hard at this and fail. And there's a long time lag to find out whether or not, well, okay, so here's what you do. You write up an article on something you're interested in. You send it off to a journal, and the journal editor has a look, and they can do a desk reject, they call it. Oh, we don't really publish this sort of thing, or, oh, you've written it in crayon, and then they reject it immediately. If they don't do that, then they send it out to 1 or more experts in the field who are then tasked for no money whatsoever. By the way, all of this is pure volunteer basis. They are then tasked with reading through the paper and commenting on it and saying whether or not they think it should be published. And I got to tell you, most articles suck. All right, I haven't done this all these years. I have, out of all the articles I have reviewed, maybe 10% I've ended up saying, yeah, we ought to accept that. But make these changes. So it's a very stressful process or it can be at any rate, for the assistant professor. So the assistant professor has to accumulate a certain number of articles. And again, this is all going to feed back into the school of thought stuff. A certain number of articles under research before they are able to get tenure and promotion. For our department, probably 4 to 6, somewhere in that range would be reasonable. 4 to 6 articles. Sort of depending on where they were published, but 4 to 6 articles. And remember, this is the time when you are working the hardest as a teacher, that when you're the least experienced, and so it's a lot of pressure. Some people really find it very stressful. Service is like, hey, did you run the Econ club? Hey, did you serve on that committee to, a curriculum committee or whatever? It's not very important for this promotion from associate from assistant to associate, and we actually kind of discourage assistant professors from doing too much in terms of service. All right. I found a humorous cartoon. Getting tenure is really about research, all right? It's possible we could turn somebody down for teaching, but generally speaking, the people who suck at the research are also probably not going to be very good teachers. Not always true. If you have taken the tenure track assistant professor position, if you're working hard at one, you're working hard at the other. And I guess what I'm stuck on a particular case that not in our department. But some joker a couple of years ago that was not only really cutting corners in research, but doing the same thing in the classroom. It was a disservice. Now, so let's see. What is this joke here? Untenured professor. How was spring break? I got a grant application finished, a book review done, 3 papers submitted, and an exam put together. How about you? Good. I went skiing in Colorado. That's funny. That's funny. Actually, that's not necessarily. It's certainly the case that the old man with the beard doesn't have the same pressure, but actually usually the reason you're doing research is because you like doing it, and so you keep doing it anyway. But it's absolutely true that does describe very well the difference in terms of the expectations and pressure. Okay, now what I wanted to show you was, so what I've emphasized here so far is that, or what I hope I've emphasized, is that let's back up and look at that. That one? No, this one. Remember, you're fired if you don't get past assistant professor. Remember that. You're fired if you don't get past. We give it a nice name. You have a terminal contract. So you get 1 more year to try to look for jobs, but you're fired, right? So that's a big deal. You have to get tenure and promotion. You can't stay at assistant professor, all right? Remember that. The most important part is the most difficult, the most challenging part is going to be the research. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. It's going to be the research. And so now, depending on what university you're at, and I found this from James Madison University, they have a really nice online description of what it takes for them, what it takes there for you to get to full or promotion. Look at number 1. Promotion to associate or receipt of tenure, same thing. If you had a stock of research, including 2 articles and 8 research points. Okay, I want to come back to that. That's really neat. I'm really glad they laid it out like this because it made it nice and easy for me to show in class. Exceptional would be 3, 2 of which must be articles and 16 research points, and so on. Right? So they're laying out what it takes, which is really nice actually, because a lot of departments just say, yeah, do something. But they've actually laid out in great detail here. Now, so how do you get these research points? Well, they're ranking journals. This is what I was suggested a moment ago, or actually a little bit ago now, as being really important. They're ranking journals. Okay, now let's look back and see what you need to get tenure. You got to get 8 research points. So 1 in a top-ranked journal would get it. Of course, it also said it had to be at least 2 articles, but 1 in a second rank ain't going to get it. 2 in a third, and look down there at the rank number 4, you'd need 4 of those. Right? I'm sorry, I've forgotten how many points it was again. Yeah, 8. That's right. 4 of those. All right, or 8 of the ones down the bottom. All right, now think about this. You're under a crap load of pressure. You've got to get tenure. Where are you aiming? Maybe down to the 3rd ranked. Maybe. But think about it. You nail that top-ranked journal, then you can have some crappy article after that, and you've got tenure, because you had to get 8 points, but at least 2 articles, all right, for tenure. Or you get the 2nd-ranked one. You nail one of those, then something in a crap journal's got you 8 points. You're done, all right? I mean, again, not that you necessarily want to quit then, because people typically do research because they enjoy doing research. But the incentive to shoot for the top is extremely high, all right? So, let's see, what's this joke here? I've forgotten about this one. Before grad school, that's exactly right. I'm going to research whatever I want. Then as a grad student, I'm going to research whatever my professor wants. Then as an assistant professor, I'm going to research whatever my tenure committee wants. And that's what that document was a minute ago, is what the tenure committee wanted. Tenure professor, I'm going to research whatever my grant committee wants. I don't have to worry about grants. And then emeritus professor, I'm going to research whatever and then they died. Okay, but that one right there is very good. I'm going to research whatever my committee wants me to research. Now, the way you do it is you express that right there. That's what the committee wants, right there. And oh yeah, I have a follow-up. Let me go back. I have a follow-up one I want to show you here in a minute. But let me back up to one that I had shown you earlier. Oh, here it is up here. I'm accidentally adding video, or adding. I went the wrong direction. Here we go. Here we go. This is what I want. Okay, see this one here? These journal rankings. Here's what I wanted to say about this, and in terms of how it affects the economics discipline. The issue is the fact that the articles that are listed at the top of these rankings are all neoclassical because they dominate the discipline. If you know, one of the ways they decide to do these rankings is how many times articles in there got cited. Well, but if most people are in that school of thought, you're going to get more citations. And so as a consequence, it ends up being a self-fulfilling, well, not a self-fulfilling prophecy, but once the list is created, it then also tends to reinforce itself. You're going to focus on you know, publishing in these journals right here. So let's see, I think I'm ready to close this up and put it back on the screen again. All right. Yeah. Okay. So we've got all these different schools of thought, right? We've got neoclassical, which is the mainstream, Marxist, Austrian, I'm not going to write them all out, post-Keynesian, new institutionalist, feminist, what else am I after? Ecological. On those journal rankings, and there are many of them out there, but if you're ranking by citations, which is what they generally do, then the journals in the schools of thought that are the most popular are going to get the most citations. So what you end up with is every journal, I've got it right here, let me read it to you. Every journal on that James Madison list at the top is a neoclassical journal. So let's say you come out of grad school, there it is, you come out of grad school and you're thinking, I'd like to do Marxist stuff, or I'd like to do Austrian stuff. Just like that lady in the cartoon said, that's not an option. Let's see, oh yeah, Control H, right. Let me read to you, or actually I'm not going to read it to you because you don't know these journals anyway, but you know on that James Madison thing where it had different, here we go. Here were their top ranked journals at James Madison University, the ones that got you the 11 points. American Economic Review, Economic Journal, Econometrica, Economica, International Economic Review, Journal of Economic Theory, Journal of Political Economy, Journal of the American Statistical Association, Oxford, every single one's neoclassical. Every single one. All right, so if you're aiming for the top of that list, you can't do research in one of these areas and get tenure. What about the second rank ones? Every single one's neoclassical. Every single one. Those are the ones that gave you, what, 7 points, right? So we had 11 for top rank, 7, 4, 2, 1. Okay. So the 7 pointers are all neoclassical. So, you know, now we're down to the best you can do is here. So let's have a look. All neoclassical. All right. So now we're down to 4th ranked. Now we're down to articles you have to get 4 of to get those 8 research points for tenure and promotion, as opposed to 2 or 1 in a crap piece or 1 in a crap piece. Right. So let's see, 4th ranked. Looking down the list here. Journal of Economic Issues. There's an institutionalist one. The top institutionalist journal is a 2-pointer, James Madison. Where was that there? JEI. JPKE is not on there at all. Review of Radical Political Economy. All right. Got a commie one. and so on. You get the general idea now. That the problem is that in this very stressful period where you have to get tenure, that you got to do what the committee wants. And since the discipline, and this is not something, well, okay, I have colleagues at other universities that believe that some of this is totally intentional and on purpose from the school of thought. I don't know that that's true. I think that if any of these schools of thought had been the dominant one instead, it's not nothing specific to this one. It's just the fact that the discipline, for reasons you'll read about in the book, and that are actually much better laid out in the new edition of the book, which wasn't going to be out yet by the time you guys took the class. But for the reason that it mentions in there, when this becomes dominant, once the list is all neoclassical, it is extremely hard to get tenure from any one of these other approaches. So basically, you are condemning yourself to a liberal arts college or a very low-tiered institution if you want to do anything other than this. And the point of this class is that's not healthy. All right, it's not healthy. Or let's put it this way: if these people aren't a bunch of idiots, if there are a bunch of idiots, that's a wonderful thing to have done. But if they're not, if they're saying things down here that make some sense, that actually sound like they might be at least competing ideas with what's going up here, the school of thought that's determining all the economic policy on the planet, then we are committing a grave error by not having discussions among these groups and instead eliminating them from the conversation from the get-go. All right, let's see. That was that. Let me see what I had here on my notes. Told you that. Ooh, yeah, okay. I'll come back to that in just a second. Yeah. Well, okay, let me talk a little bit about the undergraduate. This is from the book. It's all from some of my notes from the reading the chapter. I guess I wrote it too, but it's a long time ago. I don't remember what the hell I said. Let me come back to that, actually. One of the things that it talks about in the book is that the way the economics discipline has evolved, I just saw an example of this week. Well, hell, not this week, yesterday. That we end up with a combination of the textbook approach and the dominance of this particular school of thought right here is we end up with this idea that what we should be teaching is what they call the economic way of thinking, which is learning to evaluate alternatives in a formalized cost-benefit framework and to consider the incentives facing individuals and how these might create unanticipated consequences. That's at scarce resources, trying to allocate scarce resources. And that's certainly an absolutely wonderful thing to study. It's just that the other schools of thought would say, but that's like one little piece of the puzzle. We're leaving out a whole bunch of stuff, and that's a problem. And now an interesting point could be made saying that, well, look, here, undergraduate econ majors tend to do really well on standardized exams, on getting jobs and so forth. And I wonder who that was. Oh, I have a meeting in 10 minutes. And so on. Hang on a second, let me look here. God, I'm sick of Zoom. I'm sure you are too. No. All right. So, that's in the book. I'm not going to worry about that too much. Yeah, so I'll stop it here, and I'll pick up on this next time, and we'll finish off this chapter 2 fairly quickly here, and then we do neoclassicism, and then we do Marxism. Exciting stuff. So, since I just remembered I have a meeting in a few minutes, may the force be with you.